29 nations, with a population of more than 1,400,000,000 persons, attend the historic conference in Indonesia's capital city of Bandung. Premier Nasser heads the Egyptian group.
After the Second World War, the peoples of the Third World asserted themselves against the exhausted empires of Britain and France. For the Arab world, 1956 was a crucial year.
The Suez Canal, never far from the news in its 87 years of history, hits the headlines like a bombshell.
This was the chaotic state of affairs in Port Said Harbor when Allied forces entered on the scene.
The desperate attempt by France, Israel, and Britain to topple the Nasser regime made Nasser overnight the popular leader of the Arab world.
Egyptian Premier Gamal Abdel Nasser gets a tumultuous welcome as he drives from Port Said Airport to the harbor to mark the assumption of full Egyptian sovereignty over the Canal Zone.
Half the population of Damascus.
For Nasser, independence meant that the Arabs should not be aligned to either the West or the Soviet Union, that they should control their own resources and achieve economic and social justice for every Arab citizen. In Arab North Africa, the struggle for independence was at its height. Bourguiba returned from exile to lead Tunisia as its president. Mohammed V, the symbol of the Moroccan struggle, returned from exile as king of his independent country. But Algeria won its independence only in 1962 after a bloody and heroic revolution. Independence was both an end and a beginning. On the north shore of Africa, the fertile coast of Algeria lies across the Mediterranean Sea from France. The French conquered Algeria in 1830 and colonized it for 132 years, a much longer period of colonization than that of any other Arab country. When the French invaded, 90% of the population lived on the land as freeholding peasants. By 1945, close to 1 million French colonial settlers controlled most of agricultural production, all industry, and the administration. 8 million Algerians had been reduced either to wage labor or to living at subsistence level in the mountains. Dr. Mahfoud Bennoun was born in these mountains of Qabilia.
On May Day 1945, Algerian nationalists peacefully demonstrated, carrying our national flag. When the colonial police fired on the demonstrators, a riot broke out in the town of Sétif. French troops then bombarded indiscriminately hundreds of Algerian towns and villages. Thousands of people were rounded up and then shot. In these raids, the local villagers have recently discovered corpses of Algerians shot on 8 May 1945 over the ditches they had been forced to dig. An eyewitness relates his experience.
أول نهار جابونا لهنا للرمل راك تعرف جابوا النساء والمرأة والراجل والشيخ والشيخة والدراري والكل على تو سيركلي كلش من الجبال من البحر من السماء يضربوه بلا بايونيت هكذا الكرش ويربطوه يدوها لهنا يزيدوا يضربوه بالبشطوله هكذا للراس ويقول لك لازم تخزروا لهنا بكل شكل سنتور كل واحد داله نتاعو عاور في الليل يجيو بالكاميوات يحكموا الحباشين مساكنات يخرجوهم يجيبوهم لهنا والبلا في يدو يحفر حتى خلاص ويتيروا على جدهم تم يقتلوهم تم يخلوهم هكذاك ما دفنين ما والو ما دفنوهمش يخليهم هكذاك في الصقيع ومن بعد باش صارت الموتة كبيرة، من بعد صارت الموتة كبيرة خطر من الأولى. عبر كاين حتى نسوات ولدو ثم فوق 10 من نسوات ولدو هنا في الرمل مساكن. والحباسين دارونا هكذا ونصير. واحد يقول له موريس، قال جابنا اللي جو اترونجي، قال له كي نقول لكم فو توت لا فوا ما تخليو حتى واحد.
Colonial authorities admitted that about 6,000 were killed. The Algerians advanced the figure of 45,000. French historians believe that at least 15,000 were murdered during these events. Who knows the true figures? From then on, a new generation of nationalists realized that independence would never be offered. We would have to fight for it. Algiers in the early 50s reflected France's grip on Algeria. Algeria was the only colony integrated onto metropolitan France and divided into 3 French departments. The Algerians themselves had no citizenship rights. A century of French colonization had caused the degradation of their social and economic conditions. I was born in 1936 in this small northern Constantine village. My parents had 8 children, 2 daughters and 6 sons. So my parents decided that 3 sons and a daughter would go to Quranic school, and the rest of us would help cultivate the land and take care of the livestock. As I grew up, I realized that there was no future for me here. Like countless young men before me, I migrated to Algiers, where I found work and attended a night school. After the War of Independence, I went on to study in Paris, London, and the United States. I feel attached to my home village and frequently return to keep contact with the people and their problems. I now teach development studies in the University of Algiers, but I came back here 10 years ago to do field work among these people. My research revealed that the colonial power had confiscated about 1/3 of their land. These, together with taxes in hard cash and a very high birth rate, impoverished this community. There are thousands of communities like this one, where agricultural potentials are slim and where innumerable people have had no alternative but to migrate either to France or to Algeria's big cities. Migration played a decisive role in the raising of Algerian national consciousness. It was the migrant workers in France who set up the first nationalist party, which was transplanted back onto Algeria. Out of this party emerged a secret organization that created the National Liberation Front, the FLN, that started the War of Liberation in 1954. Algeria is the 10th largest country in the world, rich in natural resources. Given the economic importance of Algeria to France, the French government declared Algeria is part of France. No Frenchman, no government, no parliament would concede its independence. Mitterrand, the interior minister of the time, said the only reply to the rebels is war. The discovery of oil in 1956 increased Algeria's importance to France.
One of the toughest engineering jobs in the world is the laying of this new oil pipeline across the French-Algerian desert. Starting 370 miles inland, across mountains and uninhabited wastes, this line will carry oil to the Mediterranean seaport of Bougie. Local labor, using the very latest in equipment like this trench digger, assemble and bury the prefabricated pipe at the remarkable speed of 2 miles a day. At one time, oil pipes were left above the ground, calling for a great deal of inspection and maintenance. They also provided a tempting target for marauding tribesmen. Now, covered with a protective material, they can be buried and virtually forgotten. When completed, this project will have a yearly flow of 14 million tons of oil. With Europe's supply further east under constant threat, this development will do much to ensure the flow nearer home and bring additional prosperity to France.
The newly discovered riches of the Sahara hardened France's attitude and helped prolong the war, which was to drag on for 8 years. When the war broke out, I came back to join the Army of National Liberation in this area. The leadership of the FLN devised a guerrilla strategy against the French conventional war machine. The key to success was not to outfight the French, but to out-organize them. The country was organized into 6 zones, each a complex pyramid of resistance. One of my tasks was to be the liaison officer between the executive committee of the FLN in Algiers and the commander of the Northern Constantine Zone. After 3 years, I was arrested while on a mission in Algiers and spent 4.5 years in prison. There, I continued my education. In this sense, I was lucky. My brothers were involved in the war. My father was involved in the war. My father actually was killed not far from here by the French. My brother was killed also in the village, cross there, after he lost his ability to hear, because he was involved in a battle somewhere where it lasted for 24 hours. And I have also another brother who was killed over there in Tasqif, and 2 other brothers. One of them was tortured to the point where he's neurotic today. He's sick, he's mentally sick in the village. And another one was involved also stayed in Algeria as a guerrilla from 1955 through 1962. He survived it, and I also survived it. So in this sense, I think this is really my father was responsible for all this, in a sense that he really taught us from an early age to think of one thing and to give thought only to one thing, that is to free Algeria.
War-ravaged Algiers was jubilant to the point of hysteria. By a 201 majority, the referendum had declared for independence, and 132 years of French rule was over. The rejoicing went on through the night. Even Oran, last big stronghold of the OAS, seemed to think the war was all over. Then some shooting broke out.
The French settlers' secret army, the OAS, opposed to Algerian independence, resorted to a scorched earth strategy, killing Algerians and even burning the university library. Provisional government of the Algerian Republic, established in Tunisia, already divided within itself, arrived in Algiers. The war had devastated the country. The struggle for independence unified all classes. The majority of the population wanted an independent, non-aligned socialist state, born of our historical experiences and culture, and responsive to the needs and aspirations of the people. When France recalled its troops, 1 million European settlers who controlled and managed the country fled. The nation was at a standstill. There was a massive flight of capital. The banks were empty. The settlers, the engineers, professional classes, the skilled workers, who had consumed over half of all products sold in Algeria, departed. The market collapsed. Into this vacuum were sucked conflicting social forces. Immediately, the top jobs, as well as the best villas and apartments, were carved up by the middle class and the FNL leadership. The farm laborers on the old colonial estates had to provide for themselves and their families. They set up self-management committees to get production going again. Industrial workers then did the same thing. In the colonial period, the only factories were small-scale ones servicing imported goods. The development of local industry was undermined. But although the subsidiaries of multinational companies were unaffected, the self-management committees in industry at least prevented the Algerian merchants taking over these factories and presented the new leadership with a fait accompli they had to accept. This paved the way to nationalization and a non-capitalist path of development. The infrastructure Algeria inherited was geared to a colonial economy. The harbors, roads, and railways were designed to provide cheap manpower and primary commodities to the French market. And Algeria also served as a dumping ground for French industrial products. For the citizens of today's independent Algeria, the colonial legacy permeates their everyday lives. You cannot undo 130 years of French colonization in just 20 years. The question is how to start the development of a country. Industrialization is an absolute necessity. It requires a great deal of sacrifice. It has a logic of its own. This logic is universal. Every society, regardless of its cultural background or social system, has to bend to it, whether we like it or not. This is the only way we can master science and technology. For the youth of the country, this is the hard way. It requires a great deal of effort, work, concentration, study, and political determination so that they can seize the destiny of the country and move a second step towards constructing it better and making it more effective. Cement and steel, for example, are vital for the construction of schools in a country that has millions of school children queuing up, waiting to be educated, housed, fed, and then employed.
حتى قال المعلم يكفي نبدأ الآن بالسبق ونلعب.
From the outset, the French had closed down Algerian schools and banned the teaching of Arabic. After independence, Arabic was reintroduced as the language of basic instruction in schools throughout the country. So far, French has been used in administration and higher education, but Arabic is now gradually replacing it. 20 years ago, 1 child in 4 went to school. 3 out of 4 go now. That means there are 4 million young people needing more teachers and better textbooks. To run modern, sophisticated industrial plant requires higher standards of education, technical training, specialized skills, and management expertise.
كان مصطفى يتسابق مع الأطفال.
The massive program of industrialization that began in the mid-1960s was aimed at the gradual nationalization of all foreign interests in the country. Now, those precious revenues from oil and gas could pay for the industry that processed these resources. This iron ore was once exported in its raw state to France or to Britain. Now it is being delivered to the steel complex of Al-Hajjar. Jamal Mustafa is the Director of Planning and Industrial Management.
We had many obstacles. Well, I think the first obstacle we met was in our mind. We thought that to develop this kind of industry was something extremely difficult. And I think that we had to overcome this kind of inhibitions to start the industry. We had to design our own way to build this kind of complex. And we had a lot of problems because we did not know how to start the construction of a plant. Each time we had to solve problems we did not thought about before. Then we had all the usual difficulties which were related to the lack of people, of skills.
We had to give contracts to foreign companies for building factories and training the Algerian workforce. These technicians are monitoring a Japanese-built plant. Mr. Hajjat is the Director of Research.
We can bring people from abroad, experts, and they will tell us what to do. Of course, we have to pay. But personally, I think that although we do it, that experts can give immediate solution. And often they will not say how to find this solution. They will say, this is the solution. You must do like this. And for people who are in the plant, it may be okay for them just to know the solution. But if the same problem will arise later on, in this plant or in another plant, we always have to call the expert to tell us how to do.
So the most important thing is to know how to resolve the problem.
Yes, it's to know, to have the whole know-how, to have the whole scientific knowledge, to know how to find the solution. I mean, so as the whole know-how stay in the country.
In 1962, Algeria had only 3 graduate engineers. Today, thousands of them are running the new factories. Knowing that the source of power comes from industry, the capitalist nations have been trying to prevent the industrialization of the Third World. The developing societies, with 3/4 of human population, produce only 9% of manufactured goods in the world. This is the source of the unequal distribution of wealth in the world, and it is inequitable, and it has to change. The thinking behind the industrialization drive was that by the time the oil runs out, Algeria will have an industrial base capable of sustaining growth and providing jobs for the majority of Algerians. I believe that this is the only way we can build a viable economy and a viable modern state capable of withstanding interference and pressure from foreign powers. If a country remains undeveloped, it will never be viable. Plans to draw up mechanical industry on a scale suitable to Algeria's needs have been resisted, not only by France, which has consistently opposed the industrialization of Algeria, but even by pro-French elements within the Algerian government. For Algeria's agriculture to recover, it needs to be mechanized. This fertilizer manufactured in Algeria from natural gas is another example of a vital product that helps agriculture and also saves on the import bill. If oil and gas revenues are not converted into stimulating food production, but into importing food, what will future generations do when the oil runs out? Algerian agriculture faces a severe crisis. If the authorities responsible were as efficient and dynamic as those of industry, Algeria would be today an exporter of foodstuffs instead of an importer. To house the poorest rural families, the state planned the construction of 1,000 socialist villages. Only about half have been completed so far. This is the 8th May 1945 village, where 50 families share a school, clinic, and mosque, and work together as a cooperative.
عندنا تراكتور قديم دوزان مخصوص الدوزان اللي تكنيسيان موش حاضرين هنا دايما حتى نروحوا لبجايه يا سيدي ما نعرف 15 يوم ولا 20 يوم باه نرد التراكتور. يعني الحقيقه كاين فيها صعوبات صحيح. ما كفاش الخدمه تراكتور واحد يمشي للبيع ولا يروح يخدم في المزرعه. تراكتور واحد ما كفاش. عندنا الموتور تاع الماء مفسد. عندنا واحد الموتور برك، واحد راه مريح. نحب نحوسوا مثال الحكومه ولا حاجه، الحكومه حاشاه. واش هو؟ احنا مثال عندنا تراكتور واحد برك، واحد هذا كيتكسر نبقاو هكا امبان. منين تمشي؟ منين تجيب تراكتور؟
ما جات الحكومه ما تشوف، ما يخدموش الفلاحه، حنا ما نخدموش على بلاصتنا، حنا نجريو. والله غير صبر كل فلاح ما يخدمش. وانت ما تركدوا ما تكلموش على رواحكم، والله لا جني ولا يشوفها. وراه. انا عماه. غير 100 قنطار بطاطا راحت، غير 5 قنطار بطاطا. اسيدي مرحم والدينا عاود غرسنا بطاطا راحت كلاها الماء، واحد ما قال الفلاحه ويخدموا. من غير ما كاش يخدموا، كيضرب الواحد واقف يعيا. خليه عاد يضرب في التراب. كيفاه؟ اهدر ما لا تهدر من غير على التراكتور وهذيك هدر الشيء اللي مخصوص. البطاطا لا تخسر. اسنا البطاطا لا تخسر.
الحاجه موصله كامل.
الحكومه باش تخدم لولادها. هي ما تخيرش هذاك الفلاح، هذاك خدام، هذاك الطلاب، هذاك هي ما تخيرش عندها كيف ولادها كيف الكل. نعم. الفلاح هذا واش هو العامل تاع الدنيا. إلا أخذت المزرعة واش ناكلوا؟ تراب هي له هو اللي يعيش الدنيا. تراب هو اللي يدير العامل الكل. تراب هو اللي يدير الطيارة ويدير لي شروية. ماوش لوز اللي يدير لي أنا الطيارة، التراب اللي يدير لي. نعم. على مثل على التراب.
I believe that there will be no development without the creation of an industrial base. To nip in the bud the process of industrialization is a monumental error of judgment, whose consequences will be to condemn future generations to hardship and deprivation. Once a basic industry was set up, it became possible to concentrate effort on the more sophisticated manufacturing of consumer goods, as in this electronics factory in the town of Sidi Bel Abbas. Half of the 5,000 workers here are women. Fatima Dif is 25 and has been working here for 4 years. You can find a plant, an electronics plant, anywhere in the third world, like this one, assembling TVs and radios. But the originality of this plant is that it manufactures its own components, which means that Algeria is going to master the basic electronic technology. And this also, by manufacturing its components, is making it relatively independent from the multinationals who actually control the international electronics industry. In this sense, then, the Algerian program of industrialization is very original and very ambitious. However, it does have some problems. These problems are caused by a political environment characterized by red tape and an inefficient administration, which is responsible for frequent shortages, including vital spare parts. These third world workers have mastered the functioning of a complex technology in less than 20 years. But the success or failure of industrialization is always determined by political rather than technical factors. Traditional Arab urban society was divided into two broad domains, private and public. There was a sexual division of labor. Women were relegated to domestic tasks within the home. Work outside the home was monopolized by males, which is why social pressures are still being exerted on these women. Some of them still have to wear the veil before they leave the workshop under the strong recommendations of their husbands and brothers. They wear the veil as a sort of symbolic extension of the home, of the private domain into the public domain. Industrialization, the increasing employment of women, will eventually render it obsolete. Sidi Bel Abbas, where Fatima lives, used to be the headquarters of the French Foreign Legion. In its streets, you can see the transitional stage through which Algeria, like most Arab countries, is passing. There is a striking contrast between the traditional and the modern clothing styles, between the younger generations and the older ones. Although the Algerian population is not conservative politically, its social conservatism is without any parallel in the Mediterranean. No wonder a male Muslim fundamentalist told me that this female labor force constitutes a menace. Despite the opposition from their menfolk, these young women do not go out to work just for their own pleasure. Most come from large, poor families like Fatima's. 9 younger brothers and sisters, as well as her retired parents, are supported by her pay pocket of an equivalent of only £50 a week. The average Algerian family has 8 children, and TV in nearly every home stimulates all their desires for a better life. The work experience helps girls like Fatima to assert themselves in the factory, in the home, and ultimately helps their eventual social and legal emancipation. Their work may have a tremendous impact on society. This factory, by putting men and women to work side by side, helps construct an independent economy and hence a free society. By working together, they are bound to raise questions pertaining to their future. Industry will provide Algerians with the means of their self-realization, will foster the emergence of new social attitudes, new sensibilities, and a new philosophical, political, and cultural outlook. Algerians must not only learn new skills, but change their social attitudes to meet the challenges of the 20th century. The weight of the past in our collective mind is like a ghost that not only haunts our present, but may prevent us from shaping our future. There are now 20 million Algerians. Our rate of growth is one of the highest in the world. 60% of the population is under 20. A generation has grown up in independent Algeria with new aspirations. Almost half the population now lives in cities, and the rapid urbanization has created many problems. The housing crisis is so severe that 80% of families have only 3 rooms. Some of the basic necessities of life are still hard to find. The utilities and services are overloaded. The transport system is so inadequate that Algiers, with a population of 3 million in 1982, had only 36 functioning buses. Education, health, employment, and leisure facilities are insufficient. What else but the development of the nation's industry can satisfy these people's needs? Mohammed Azzouz was 18 when he was hired and trained by the steel plant 12 years ago. Like most other workers here, he came from the countryside. The steel industry offering him the chance to learn a skill, earn a decent wage, and aspire to a reasonable standard of living. But Mohammed and his colleagues also suffer from numerous frustrations in the daily life of the city of Annaba beyond the steelworks perimeter. As elsewhere, the development of services has not caught up with the workers' needs. Housing, schooling, transport are all inadequate and generate tensions which they bring onto the factory. The law of socialist management ensures that workers' representatives participate in the decision-making, which the managers welcome, but this allows the officials of the party, who control the union, to interfere with the everyday running of these factories. This has compounded the problems of public industry, which is then faced with the unfair criticism that socialist management does not work.
Et qu'on va apparaître à partir des paramètres affichés ici. En termes de production, il s'agira de produire en 82 1 080 000 tonnes de fonte et 843 000 tonnes de coque.
It may seem to the romantics like a vision of hell, but this is the very essence of progress. Work in industry requires much hardship and sacrifice, but it is the source of modern civilization. Without it, there is no growth or prosperity. To run such an industry needs a high degree of coordination, organization, and scientific management. If the pace of industrialization is not slowed, all this is bound to contribute to the modernization of our economy, society, and culture.
Well, we started, and to start, I think, was the most difficult thing in a country like in our country. We have been able to start from nothing and to create an industrial basis. We made a number of mistakes, we had bad choices, but this is the learning process. It was costly. We are not highly efficient. But when we saw what happened in 20 years, and 20 years, what does it mean for a country? If we had to propose to a country, would you accept to pay this X billion of dollars and to be sure that by 20, 30, 40 years, you will be an industrial country? Well, do you know many countries who would refuse such a proposal? In fact, this is the bet we made in Algeria. And I think that this bet now is about to be won.
Today, most consumer goods, like TVs, radios, cookers, and fridges, are produced in Algeria. But few families are as fortunate as Mohammed's. The failure of the housing ministry to provide accommodation for workers led the steel company to build illegally apartments such as this four-room one where Mohammed and his family live. But the authorities responded to this by banning any future initiative of this sort, even though a third of the steel workers have no proper accommodation. Yet, they expect a high rate of labor productivity. Mohammed is now a foreman in the cold rolling mill. It is foremen like him who play a decisive role in the fulfillment of production targets. Yet they have little authority despite their experience and technical competence. The failure of those in power to satisfy the basic needs of the workers affect the rhythm of production and steer up the union against the management.
يخطط على البروغرام فيزيك هذا 82 يخطط كيف نوصلوا مليون دو طن. عندهم فكره واضحه هما. من حين كان حاجه اخرى كان لو بلان سوسيال العامل باش يوصل مليون دو طن. العامل لازم له الماكله، العامل لازم له الخلاص، العامل لازم له المسكن. هذا هو باش نوصل مليون دو طن. مش نص مليون دو طن هكاك يكتبها لنا ونعولوا يعول على عامل مسكين اللي ما ياكلش ياكل لك في البطاطا ويبات لك في مضرب مش مليح. كان دو بوان نوصلوا ل مليون دو طن ونزيد 2 مليون دو طن.
Oui, on est d'accord pour le but de 1 million de tonnes. أن العمال مستعدين وواعيين باش يفوتوا المليون من طن تاع الحديد السائل. وإنما لازم تكون فيه العدالة. لازم تكون فيه العدالة. العدالة من ناحية كل الجوانب. العدالة الاجتماعية هذه اللي نطالبوا منها.
The production target was achieved, but the workers' demands remain unfulfilled. I believe that social justice will prevail only in an industrial economy that can't be attained without democracy. Democracy, in its broad sense, is not only a moral imperative, but a necessary condition for a rational management of a developing society. Democracy makes those in power accountable. This would not only reduce injustice and errors of judgment, but also corruption and nepotism. Democracy promotes competence, efficiency, and a division of labor based on merit, professionalism, and technical skill. Development and democracy go together. Underdevelopment breeds only tyranny and stagnation.
وعلاش داروها؟ على الحقوق هاك تشوف كاش الضرب البليسور مازالوا دايرين اتونسيون خايفين. واش اللي طلبوا طلبوا الحقوق نتاعهم باش يديروا الالكتريسيتي الغاز يخدموا القنطره نتاع ترى هذيك يخدموا القنطره نتاع السميد ب 35,000 يلحق لتما القرعه تاع الغاز ب 5,000 فرنك. يلا ما كاينش المراه مريضه حتى انت مثلا في التراكتور واحد في لابان تاع التراكتور نو حنا رانا كاع كل بنادم الانسان رانا كاع وغير ولاد رابح ولا كانوا معاهم لا هذوك اللي من هي كاع رابح يمشي في الليل يلحق الصباح لهنا يمشي في الصباح يلحق في الليل.
هما بداوها ما عندناش خبر بصح كاين اللي يشاركوا يعني هاي بالكيف
من الوالدين كانوا يشاركوا نتاع في معروف هذه. واش قالوا لهم برك كاش ما عطاوهم ولا واش عطاوهم في الحبس في الحبس ولا في الحبس
اليوم عداو في الشرع داو 15 نترس
13 نترس داو
13 عداوهم عند الجوج
ضربوا فيهم بالسلاح البارح
بالكرتوش بالعمل
كيف يضربوا يضربوا فيهم
بالجرونات تاع الزرار تاع البواز
وكاين الماء
الدخان هذيك ضربوهم بالماء بصح يعني طلبوا الولي ما جاش
الولي ما عرفش يجيهم قالوا غادي يقولوا راه جا من غير السوبريفي واحد الشخصيات هذيك تاع الجندرميري والارمي تاع الارمي تاع بجايه.
You can't expect people to be living under subhuman conditions and yet expect them to participate as free citizens in a democratic process. Democracy has to include also other aspects, including the economic aspects. A democratic society must ensure to its citizenry some form of well-being and social security of some sort. Ensure them that they have equal opportunities as far as schools are concerned, that the chances would be equal for everybody, both economical, cultural, as well as political. We are running out of time. The achievements of the past decade are being eroded by a high birth rate, and the leadership has not dared to encourage birth control. In Algeria, as in all of the Arab world, if we do not set up an industrial economy today, in 20 years, it will be more expensive, and therefore we won't be able to build a future for these children. They need an adequate education. They need houses, and indeed, we need jobs. Already, there is much squalid accommodation, and unemployment is spreading. Four times as many children are being born as new jobs created. Schools, employment, houses, roads, transport, cinemas, cultural centers must not only keep pace with this demographic growth, but have to be multiplied now in order to satisfy the current needs. We have 2.5 million families that need houses now. The rhythm of industrialization must be increased. There is a large internal market waiting for its products. Although this industry's aim is to resolve the fundamental needs of society, a backward society ought also to respect not only the logic of industrialization, but also its sociological implications. In 50 years, there has been substantial progress in Algeria, as in all the Arab world. Yet many things still have to be done in order to construct a new society, prosperous, free, well-organized, and especially democratic. This is not an easy task.